Well, g'day guys. So last week my video was all about how to fix a broken wheel stud, which happened on this vehicle on the other side of the vehicle. And well, we've had a fantastic week of conversations on Facebook, Instagram and YouTube with a whole bunch of information. And some of it's been really good. Some of it's been frankly quite crap. But I wanted to do this follow-up video because the reality is I didn't get everything right. I didn't put in all of the information I could have put in, and so I just feel like, you know what, a response video is going to help you guys get out there and wheel well. Firstly, thanks so much for all the comments. My channel is all about educating. I want to help people wheel well, and I certainly do not know everything. I'm not an idiot that thinks I do. I get things wrong. What I love doing is having a good, healthy dialogue and discussion where we all learn. I love that, and that's why I always make the effort to comment and respond to your comments as best I can. And as you can imagine, that's a lot of work. What I don't appreciate is saying I'm an idiot. Guys, you've got to grow up. That's just childish behaviour. Let's have adult conversations, and if you can't do that, well, get off the channel. That's the bottom line. I'm not interested in that sort of comment. It doesn't achieve anything. If you've got some valuable information and it disagrees with me, put it down there, put your argument out, and let's talk about it because we can learn from that. So, for those that don't know, I am a qualified mechanic, but look, I haven't worked as a mechanic other than on my own vehicles. I haven't worked in a workshop for many, many years, so I'm not always up to date on the latest technologies, thinking, and I forget stuff as well. But I
think you also sometimes know what you know and you forget that other people don't know it.
Yeah, that's true too, yeah. So anyway, that's my heart, and I know that's a bit of a preamble at the start of this video, and I wouldn't normally give you all of that info. So I'm going to put a link down below in the comments or in the description for last week's video, and I'm also going to link to a video done by a guy called John Cadogan, auto expert. Now, he's a very, very different channel to me, but he does an excellent video about how to, work around wheel studs and all of that sort of stuff. He is an engineer, so I think he's going to help you a lot by watching his video on that. Now, there was a number of comments that said that the reason my wheels came loose and the stud broke was because I've been over tightening my wheels because I lubricate the nuts. I'm going to say at this point, I don't believe that was the case. The simple fact of the matter was, and the reason my wheel came loose was, I forgot to tighten it up, okay? I used the rattle gun on a light setting to do an initial fitment of the wheels with intentions of tightening them up. I got distracted, forgot to do it, went for a big drive, wheel came loose, wheel stud broke. Bad story. That's where we are today, okay? So that's the reason in my case. But I'm going to bring a few more things to you as to other reasons why a wheel could come loose, why your wheel studs could break, okay? So I'm going to get into a number of the reasons I hold certain positions, and I'm going to justify them. And I'm also going to give you a bunch of information to help you avoid the situation of your wheel coming off. And all of this is coming out of the comments that you guys have given to us. So, to lubricate or not lubricate your wheel studs. Well, boy, oh boy, wasn't that a hot potato. Everybody got real excited about that, and I've been doing a bunch of research on the internet, and it seems it's just going to be one of those hot potatoes for life. At the end of the day, I'm going to say this right up front, I don't think it's really that big a deal if you lubricate your wheel studs or you don't. If you're happy either way, you do that. I'm going to continue lubricating my wheel studs, but here's my response to some of the comments. Okay, the factory doesn't lubricate the wheel studs from the factory. Well, my response to that is this. When a factory builds a vehicle, they have things that dictate what they do that are very, very different to what you and I do. So if they say in their workshop manual, you must or must not lubricate the wheel studs, well then probably follow that. But the cost for them to lubricate the wheel studs may be a reason they don't do it, because it costs them money, it costs them time, and it costs them product. And when they're manufacturing a vehicle, 1 cent can change their decision. Okay, so that could be a reason. I'm not a vehicle manufacturer, but I'm just saying they have parameters that you and I don't have to follow. So the next comment was that the lubricant will make the nut come undone from a bolt. So here's just a random bolt, and you can see on there that we've got a thread. Now, if you're making that comment, there's some assumptions. Firstly, and I would say these assumptions are wrong. Firstly, the assumption is that the reason a nut stays on a bolt is because of friction in the thread. That's not correct. Okay, the reason a bolt stays tight and the nut stays on the bolt is the way a bolt works is that when you tighten up the nut, you create a clamping force between the nut and the head of the bolt. All right. Effectively, what you do is you stretch the bolt. The metal in the bolt gets longer because you're tightening up the nut and you're stretching the bolt. Now, all the bolt wants to do is go back to its original length, and that creates the clamping force. And that clamping force, as long as it remains, the bolt will remain tight. With my situation where the wheel nuts came loose and I broke a stud, I never tightened up the nuts. Therefore, I never created that clamping force of the bolt where the wheel was clamped to the hub, and that was the reason my wheel came loose and I broke the stud. If lubricating a thread was such a bad thing, we wouldn't see it being done ever, or in very, very specific circumstances it would be done. Whereas in industry, and I've spent a bit of time working in industry, lubrication of threads is standard procedure. You will always use a never seized product or some sort of product on a thread. Very rare circumstances you wouldn't do that. And the reason is it makes the nut come on and off the bolt nice and easy for serviceability reasons, but it also stops the nut picking up, or the thread picking up, or the technical term is galling. And effectively what happens is a small particle of metal will get drawn off the steel, if you will. It'll come away from the steel and it binds up in the thread, and next thing the nut won't go on anymore, it won't come off, and the thread gets damaged and the whole process becomes negative. And that's why, generally speaking, you will always run a lubricant on the thread. So that's general bolt tech, if you will, how they work and so on, and some considerations around that. So let's bring this right back down to what we're talking about here. Should you lubricate your wheel studs? I still say yes. When your wheel nut comes up against the wheel, this face, this tapered face here, and you need to make sure that your wheel nuts are the correct wheel nuts for your wheels, because sometimes they can have a different taper, especially between, say, steel wheels and alloy wheels. Now, this taper, when it comes up against the wheel, is obviously going to provide a certain degree of friction between this face and the wheel. And that friction has been determined by the vehicle and wheel manufacturers, and that's part of the contributing factor to the specification they give you. The other area of friction is the thread area down inside here where the bolt goes onto your wheel stud. Now, if that thread is dry and dirty and maybe a bit rusty and so on, you're going to get a very strange number or effect from your torque wrench. And what it will mean is that the torque setting from the different wheel studs is going to be different, which can give you different issues of warping your disc rotors and not having the wheels sit cleanly on this face here. So that's a consideration and not a good thing. We don't want that to happen, which is part of the reason why I like to put a little bit of lubricant on my threads, is that I ensure that the friction or the resistance to turning from the thread is the same on all of my wheel studs. It's really important though that this face here does not get lubricated, because we do want that to be seated correctly against our wheel. Another consideration on that is also that the grease can migrate out of here and start to make your wheels look all dirty and grimy, which, hey, nobody likes that. So here's something, look, this is one of those things, I think I basically forgot about it. You know, as I said earlier in the video, I don't work on cars all day, every day. But I have known this information in the past. When you start to lubricate your studs, you do need to change the torque setting of your torque wrench from the factory specification. And the general rule of thumb from my research indicates that about 20 to 30% reduction in the torque specification applied by your vehicle manufacturer. So in this case, Toyota says these wheel studs should be done up to 100 foot-pounds. So reduce that by 20%. So that brings us back to a number of 80 foot-pounds in this situation. So the reason we reduce that torque setting is because of the lubrication on the thread. It reduces the amount of effort required to tighten up the nut to get the correct stretch on the stud. And that provides us the correct clamping force of our wheel to the hub and keeps our wheels tight. So reducing that specification by 20 foot-pound is the thing. Now, I just say at this point, all of this deviates from the factory rule book. And if you're not happy with that, don't do it. Just stick to the factory settings if that's what you're happier with. The next comment that comes up, and I can understand this, and a lot of guys say, look, I just use a breaker bar and I do the wheel studs up by feel, and I get that. In the trade we used to call it just mechanics feel, and it's just elbow torque. It's when you have a lot of experience, you have a sense of when a bolt is correctly tightened up. Now, I suspect if we went and put a torque wrench on that bolt, it wouldn't be far off where it should be. Is it exactly right? It won't be. It won't. Like if you're going to tell me you can go and do all of the wheel studs on your vehicle and get them to 80 foot-pound because that thread's been lubricated, look, no, it's not going to happen. But are they going to be suitable? Yes, I'd say so. But if you want to be right, you get a torque wrench and you do it. If you don't do nuts and bolts up every day of the week, you get a torque wrench and you do it this way, and you know you're right. So the next point that was made, and look, I don't think it's a real issue unless you're doing something wrong, was that in the end of your nut can get a build-up of grease to the point where you'd hydraulic lock the nut on the stud. Look, that's a very feasible, it could potentially happen, but to make that happen, you'd have to be putting an awful lot more grease on these studs every time you did the wheels than's warranted. These nuts here have been, on and off however many times, and I'm literally getting nothing out of the end. Okay, so that's just a non-issue, assuming you're putting the correct amount of lubricant on the threads. So how much lubricant should you put on there? Well, I'll show you. Not that much. Okay. That is it's just too much, okay? We are talking about a smear of lubricant. So a little smear like that, spread that on the thread. That there is enough for this stud over here, okay? That's way too much. All right, it's just the tiniest smear. It's basically getting a little bit of lubricant down into those threads. Now you can use Never-Seez or a product like that. You can use just wheel bearing grease as well. We're just wanting to provide a little bit of lubrication to those threads so they don't gall up. We don't have issues with rust or corrosion of those threads. We just keep them in good serviceable condition. Okay, this next one is something that shouldn't really happen, but it's good to know. And it's just making sure that these mating faces here are relatively clean. Now this one here has a little bit of something on it, so that could be cleaned off. Especially if you're doing a lot of wheeling or sand work, you can get sand build up in these parts here, and then when you put the wheel on, it gets into this face. Effectively, you want that face there and this face here to be in good serviceable condition and clean. So a little wire wheel on a drill, You can just run that around there and keep it clean, a bit of a scrape. Look at that, they don't need to be polished. You just don't want a whole build-up of contaminant there, because again, as that, you know, if that contaminant moves and starts to come out of there as the wheel's in place, then the bolt's clamping force is going to be reduced and the wheels can come loose. So keep those faces nice and clean. Okay, a few people brought up the use of rattle guns. Look, some people don't like them. They're a great tool. They speed up your job, but there are things about them that are not good. And when it comes to tightening up bolts, you need to be really careful about using your rattle gun. And this goes for any bolt. It's really easy to over tighten bolts and under tighten bolts when you're using a rattle gun. So be careful. That's just a general mechanical warning. Now, when you're using a rattle gun to start bolts, you run a real risk of cross-threading that nut. So generally speaking, it's really wise to spin the nut on by hand and get it started a couple of threads, and then use the rattle gun to spin it down, and just use the speed of the gun to put the nut home, and then you can get your torque wrench out and tighten it to the correct torque. Now, when you're spinning that nut home, make sure you have your rattle gun set on a really light setting, okay, so that all it's doing is spinning it up. So the next point, I think this is one of those ones that's really well known and common, but I'll mention it just in case you don't know it, because hey, we all have to learn everything at some point in our lives. So we've got the wheel on there, and this is about the sequence that you tighten up your wheel nuts. Okay, so this has just got 5 wheel nuts on it, on this vehicle. A lot of them have 6, some have 4, doesn't really matter, but the principle is that you want to tighten them up in a sequence. Okay, what have I done there? There we go. Okay, the principle is you want to tighten them up in a sequence. So the temptation might be to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That would be bad. The sequence should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you go basically to the opposite wheel nut to the one you've just done, and do it in stages. So do this one up a little bit, do that a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And why is that important? Well, if you just tighten this up, you put all the clamping force on this bolt, and then if you go to this one, you're now clamping all of this side of the wheel and the hub assembly, and not this side. Now this side is effectively going to pull away. It's going to have a gap in it, and you can get to the incorrect tension of that stud before the brake assembly and the wheel have actually come home. And what it means is that you're going to warp things, you're going to bend things in the wheel, in the brake disc, and maybe even in the hub, because you've brought things together incorrectly. So always use that sequence, just basically by going to the opposite stud, and you're going to make sure that everything assembles up just nice, and you're going to get it. Well, you're going to look after your truck. It's going to be great. You'll love it. Mrs. Mad Matt thought that was funny. I don't like sitting on the side of the road with the wheel falling off. So anyway, okay, the last thing I wanted to bring up, and again, I did bring this up in the other video, but to make this a specific point, it's really good practice. Once you've put your wheel on and you've driven for, the numbers vary. At the end of the day, after you've driven for a period of time, it could be 5 kilometers, it could be 50, it could be 100 kilometers. Jump out, grab your torque wrench, and just go round and check the tension on all of those nuts again. This is especially true if you're running brand new wheels. If you've just put a nice new set of mags on there, make sure that you go and check that tension. And the last point I want to make, and this was again raised in the comments, is it's a well-known thing. Tyre shops, they're all about speed. They're using rattle guns all day, every day, to pull wheels off, put wheels on. and I'm not having a go at the guys that work in tyre shops. They are professionals, or they certainly should be professionals, and they probably have a very refined sense of how tight they're doing the nuts up with their rattle guns. But it's not good practice, and they know it, but they get away with it most of the time. But I would suggest when you get home from, you know, having wheels done or a service done on your vehicle, grab your torque wrench. Well, don't grab your torque wrench first. Grab a breaker bar, back a wheel nut off, then use your torque wrench to tighten it up. Back this one off, use your torque wrench to tighten it up. Do one at a time around your vehicle. Then you know your nuts are correctly torqued. Well, there you go, guys. Who would have thought you could talk for that long about nuts? Hey, of course you can. All right, guys, look, I think that's been helpful. I've learnt a lot. I've been reminded of some things I'd forgotten. It's been a great conversation. Let's continue having a good, healthy discussion on the channel. That's what I want to do. I'm not interested in stupid comments. I love the discussion. I love and really appreciate the guys that put effort into writing a considered response, even when they disagree with me. That's okay. Disagreement is okay. Guys, I hope it's helped. I've appreciated it. Yeah, well, that's enough from me. I'm Bad Matt. Stay safe on the trails.